we're back and we're moving into our final conversation for today. This one is to help us understand your brain when it's happy. And then it's an interesting conversation that, of course, Dr. Joel Cervantes has willingly taken on. So good morning and welcome.
Good morning, lady and gentlemen. Thanks for the invitation. As you all know fully well, I like to educate.
Yes.
I don't know a lot, but I love to educate. A little bit I know, I'm more than willing to teach the Belizean public about it.
And you love demystifying the brain.
I love it because there's so many things we haven't answered, and each day it is fascinating.
Yeah.
It is awesome to sit down and read and try to understand what the brain is.
We surely answered what it is to be happy.
Well, I'm happy because I am doing what I love. This is my passion.
So there's a neuroscience of happiness.
There's a neuroscience of everything.
Okay.
And happiness is just one angle.
All right.
And it can be a very complicated topic.
And you know what? I don't even know where to start. I know we all want to be happier. I know we don't think of what the brain is doing when we're happy. So I'll give you your leeway to start it off.
Okay, well, basically, when we talk about happiness, there's a genetic predisposition to happiness. About 50% of us being able to be happy is the genes that we have. In other words, the contributions not only from our mother and father, but mother's line and father's line. It's very, very important. For example, we will find that in Belizean society, people who are mestizo, especially mestizo women, have a lot of depression. Why? It is unfortunately, from what we've been seeing, the contribution of European blood. So I don't want to say a country of origin as such, but it's not basically indigenous blood.
Yeah.
We see less depression in indigenous people. That's something important. Then something else, the circumstances that you grew up in, right? That's approximately, it's a percentage like I have it here, right? It's 8%, your environment that you grew up in. And then of course, your personal interpretation of things. So in theory, when you are conceived, the contribution of mother and father, the sperm and the oocyte, when it comes together, in theory, if our parents are healthy and genetically they're well, we get all the tools that we're supposed to have to be happy people.
Now let's break down the genetic portion, because this is always something that fascinates me in medicine in general. So, you know, there's certain areas of origin across the globe that we all have, especially as Belizeans, we all have mixed together. Why is it that some particular genetics have a response in different ways? So when you say a European based genetics would be more predisposed to unhappiness.
Yes.
And then we also have sometimes where if you're of African descent, that you have certain genetic predispositions as well. Why is that? Why does that take place? Is it adaptability for the type of place that you live?
I think it is. It is curious. For example, in Spain, the amount of mental disease, suicides and depression is very high. And in theory, they're a pure race. It's just an example, right? Those of us in Belize, well, I'm talking about a westernized definition of things. I don't think I'm an impure race. I don't think you are. I don't think Marlene is. But I am just using a westernized concept. It's like they try to devalue us at times, but I don't allow myself to be devalued. I'm not less intelligent than any colleague who's on that side of the continent. I don't think so. So I'm just using a term, it's just a descriptive term. However, genetics were made for the pool to be intermingled. And that, I think, is what gives us super intelligence.
Yeah, okay. So we went through some of the predispositions and also, but I want to focus on that 42% that you spoke of, which is interpretation. Is that just outlook? Choose to be a happier person?
No, it has to come basically with, well, I have to base it on the second portion, the 8%, which is circumstances or environment. And then that 42% is your capability to decide right or wrong. As long as your brain structures are healthy, it is what you make of it. It is what you are going to do with it. So you have a certain possibility to influence and to decide what you want to be. And of course, schooling is important. What we learn from a preschool perspective all the way up to sixth form and beyond. And of course, if we didn't have a formal university or tertiary level education, but even if it's a street education, but if it is something that is positive, we're going to be very happy people.
I'm fascinated most with the 8%, the circumstances in terms of how that contributes to you being happy or not. because a lot of people, the perception would be that that would be the majority, because if you're in a lot of people wouldn't consider that genetics plays a role, but surely would think that if your pay is late and that is a circumstance that you would then be unhappy, or if it is that you are going through hardships, but you're saying that when you break it down neurologically, it's only 8%.
The circumstances, yes. In other words, people could have been in a very negative environment, but if your brain is normal, it's working normally. And I want to define it from two perspectives. You have a psychological perspective and you have a neurological perspective. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I read. And of course, if there's a psychologist who comes and said he or she could school you all better than I can from a psychological perspective. But basically, when we talk about happiness, a lot of people misinterpret what we call hedonia, which is basically pleasure. It's thinking about me. It's in the moment. It's just something that is subtle and it's just passing from a psychological perspective versus the other perspective, which is eudaimonia, which basically means that I am thinking about another human being, something long-term, values, what I go putting in my brain on a daily basis, and I go training myself to reach that perspective. So from a psychological perspective, it can be just pleasure, short-term, just me. It can be I'm thinking about the other persons. And of course, what the psychologists, they have done, or they've taken it to the holistic view, a combination of both is what makes us a happy person from a psychological perspective.
Is there a scientific reaction in the brain when a person is happy?
There is. And I'll take it now to the neurological perspective.
Okay.
And the neurological perspective, we can break it down quite simply. I see, for example, Marlene has a cup here, and I presume it's her morning coffee. So I look at this cup, if I may, and it has coffee. And it smells nice, right? I am not a coffee freak, but for example, what is the first thing from a neurological perspective? I like it. We're visual people. Or I smell it, I like it. Secondly, I want it. And thirdly, after I've tasted the coffee, if I liked it, right?
Satisfied.
So I like the idea about it, and now I am satisfied. Those are the three phases.
No.
You
So
want it, you like it, you're satisfied.
It's all your it's three of your sensory organs kind of contributing.
So let's go there first. The sensory organs, you're so right. Touch, smell, eyesight, your hearing, that combination that captures everything from the outside. And we may think that from a neurological perspective, it is only the brain. Well, we have nerves. If I touch something and it's hot and it's too hot, that's not pleasure. If I touch something and it's soft and I like the texture, I might like the pleasure, because it sends nerves that go up my arm, my spinal cord, into my brain. That's the peripheral nervous system that goes to the central nervous system. So from outside, all those organs can contribute. In fact, my stomach can contribute, my intestines, my heart, my lungs, everything that is connected in the body will give us some part of what is pleasure.
No, just for me to understand, and to probably clear up a misconception that I might have, the way I understood happiness biologically was that there are these antennas and they exchange some chemical or fluid or charge, and there are these receptors that tell you, listen, this is something good, and it transmits. And it can be artificially done as well. So like things like chocolate give you that same sensation. Could you please go through that whole dynamic?
Not a problem. So if we retake the senses, like Marlene said, the senses, whatever is from the outside world, you know, I see a beautiful young lady pass, I'm like, whoa, you know, my pupil dilates. You understand me? A perfume I like. You know, you have a perfume, I'm like, man, what perfume is that? I want to buy it. You understand me? My sense of smell. So the outside senses, your inner senses, the way your organs are working, these are important. These feed through the spinal cord to the brain. Now, the brain specifically has different areas that are involved. And I don't know if I could put this on here. Right? So we talk about the outside of the brain, the cortex, the surface of the brain, and it's something very important. Curiously enough, on the surface of the brain here, we have centers at the bottom here, right behind the nose, right under behind the forehead, And here at the top, we have areas on the surface of the brain that have a lot to do with pleasure and happiness. And they're going to communicate all this area deep down here that I'm signaling.
I wonder why it's there, though. Why is it here and there? Why, I wonder?
Well, for example, I mean, the
They
nose,
can
we have
smell.
nerves.
Closer to these.
Right. The
Yeah.
eyes, in fact, basically the
Because you
retina is a
also
projection of the
have-
brain.
You have there's a smell to most things, like even to a person, not
Exactly.
necessarily perfume.
Exactly.
So you can pick up, well, some people call it auras, but it's like pheromones and other things as well, hormones.
So if we want to make it, say it in a nutshell, basically what does this jello, this brain work with? Electricity and a system of chemicals. I use the word juices. We talk about neurotransmitters, and we talk about neuromodulators, and we talk about hormones.
So
Specific.
we want the English language, right?
The English language, that jello in here that feels like the tip of my nose works at what? Electricity, let's say 110. It works at a 110 system and juices. And it's an intricate, microscopic, you can't see with the human eye, interaction. And all these different areas of the brain, from the surface, deep structures, all parts of the brain are involved in us having pleasure and or happiness. All parts of the brain.
Can I ask a very dumb question?
There's no dumb question.
I know there's no such thing as a dumb question, but it feels like one. What is the function of being happy? What is the biological and what is the function? What usage, what utility does being happy serve?
Well, this started from Aristotle, and also Darwin did research on it, and basically both of them have said the same thing. It is for the conservation of the human species. That's what it basically is for. When they do experiments on lab rats, for example, whereby the neurophysiologists are going to shock an area of the brain that they found a little center that does something in the brain, right? They put in a little wire and they shock. And that sends a message to the rat to go to a little recipient where they have sugar water to drink. That is just pleasure.
Yeah.
But as human beings, in theory, because we have a higher level, because we have more tissue within the brain, we have this outside cortex that we call it, makes us the most intelligent in the mammalian species. That is what it has really evolved to a point that happiness is one of the things, is a driving force for us.
It makes us thrive.
Thrive. That's what makes us want to exist and to live a full life.
Yeah. Well, imagine if all we did was eat, sleep, like just your basic functions. What
That's
would be the
basically what we're
purpose?
doing right now, though.
Maybe you. I don't know about the rest of us. But most people are seeking that next thrill, that next pleasurable moment or happy moment.
Well, yes, it is. Some people are happy being a couch potato.
Yeah.
I think like yourselves, we're happy people being very inquisitive and being restless because we're always searching
Or
for answers.
learning,
We're always learning.
Does happiness play a sexual role
It
in terms of, because the primary purpose of human being is to...
It does.
Well, functionally.
It does. Happiness.
It's sexual.
It does. It does. In fact, it's amazing because Danish and some Danish and some Dutch investigators have been doing a study, and this is cute, whereby they've been studying women, and not to discriminate women, and they've been comparing women that are having a true orgasm and women who are faking orgasms. And there's a special machine that we don't have available in Belize, but it's called a functional MRI. So they put on all these attachments onto you,
So you
and
can
they put
do
you in a
live
machine.
study of the brain.
Right. And so imagine to what point they have a person in a lab, I mean, having a sexual activity, and they've actually been able to stand up and say, you are faking it.
Wow.
You really had an orgasm. So yes, I mean, sex and happiness does go together.
Yeah.
And quite simply, the structures in the brain that have to do with happiness, the overall name is called the limbic system.
Yeah.
And it's spread out all over the brain. But important areas here, the temporal lobe, the frontal lobe.
Yeah.
All areas are important, but primarily that limbic system, the majority of it sits here in the temporal lobe. So common sense, if somebody gets hit in the side of the head, a baseball bat, or 3 or 4 guys jump them and they got beat up, or a boxer, or a traffic accident, and the mechanism of injury had to do with this region, that could explain why family members come forward afterwards and say, hey, guess what? Doc, can you help? This person changed.
Yeah.
He was such a happy person and now he's miserable, or vice
Or
versa.
cranky all the time.
Right.
And that's what I was going to say. Understanding the science of happy helps us to understand the science of mental illness.
It does.
Because when you talk about things like oxytocin, for example, or your body's capacity to produce your happy-making hormones, that's where sometimes people who suffer with depression, that's what they are unable to do or struggle to do. Is that the case?
That's
from what
the case.
I understand?
No, basically, with mental disease, what is the problem with it's basically any type of neurological disease. Yeah. You either have a dysfunction, a short circuit, we call it sparks. Just imagine a cable gets peeled off. You have a copper wire and it's covered by a plastic. Nerves are like that, neurons are like that. So if it peels off electrically, it's a short circuit. And if you also put together that from a chemical perspective, or the juices in the brain, we could have an underproduction, insufficient production of these neurotransmitters or juices. Yeah. 1, 2, they use too quickly. It's not spread out in 24 hours. Or 3, sometimes neurological problems, and we can see this in psychiatric patients, because between neurology and psychiatry, it's a very thin line, that there's certain storehouses in the brain, but it becomes destroyed. So people can have neurological / mental disease, a lack of production, a lack of proper storage, or the usage is too fast. Yeah. That's the bottom line to the majority of mental and neurological diseases.
If you could draw a parallel, it's kind of what happens to people with diabetes, but in the brain, like the insulin production is failed or in some way, completely
it is
unable or not sufficient.
It's not sufficient, or the body stops recognizing certain juices as proper. It looks at it as alien. Yeah. It's like your right hand decides that it wants to destroy the left hand because something is wrong in the brain. Yeah. And with respect to diabetes, we first thought, generally speaking, that diabetes was something that just the pancreas was involved. What this same functional MRI mapping has been showing that even in diabetes, there is something centrally that goes wrong, because they're able to map all these abnormal signals that go to and from the brain.
In addition to some of the disorders that come, the healthy side of happiness is where I'm fascinating with, because just looking at the issue of communication, I read a book once that said the best time to tell somebody something is right after they laugh. Mm-hmm. They're more receptive to it. So it has that biological function too. Is that true, and why would that be true?
It's totally true, because again, it has to do with that you have the proper electricity and the proper juices present at that time. If it's dopamine, acetylcholine, Marian talked about oxytocin. We have all these juices. I call them mango juice, coconut water. When I explain in my office, I put a regular thing that we can find in Belize.
So we can understand.
Because if I tell people dopamine, they look at me, it's like, what are you talking about? And then they can't remember the word. So they go home talking about the tamarind juice, Dr. Cervantes said the tamarind juice, to low or to high. Yeah.
But I think with conversations about mental illness, that's how dopamine has become a regular part of conversations. But let me just, what is the difference between a person who appears to be happier than others? I mean, if you're saying that primarily there's genetic and there is, I think there's interpretation was the word you used?
How you interpret,
yeah,
and circumstances.
So what makes a happier person?
Having a normal brain, and if you are able to not only kickstart but maintain having high levels of the normal juices flowing all through the brain. That is important. In other words, having a natural high without needing any external substances. Yeah. Because when you have to use external substances, whatever it is, alcohol, tobacco, whatever, marijuana, whatever, food, even excessive exercise or Viagra for sexual pleasure, whenever using a substance from outside that's in excess, your brain can stop producing certain chemicals or produce less, because you're substituting with outside sources. Yeah, I have a little list of them here. For example,
hug
sugar.
Your dog.
I remember we had a conversation once.
Can I just get that clarification before we move any further? Hug your dog? What is that? Don't insult us, dog lovers. These are fake ways of generating. Okay, I'm just checking.
It's not a typographical error. Quite simply, when you're reading all of these things, it's just to put a break there for people to be observant and to ask the question. Oh. In theory, this is supposed to be...
So I passed the test?
You passed the test.
Okay, good.
She's very observant. She has a happy brain. So she's able to
because I hug my dog a lot.
Exactly. So all of these are bad for the brain.
Yeah.
They're bad.
You have cannabis twice.
Repetitive.
And I think we had a conversation once where you explained to us that the body and the brain naturally produces one of the chemicals in cannabis.
Right. We have what we call endocannabinoids. And
so
we find this in the brain and in other organs, the lung, the intestines, throughout the body.
So why is it still undertaking it?
Well, basically because chemically speaking, it's not the same component. What is in the marijuana leaf is similar to, but not the same as our own. So the more marijuana you consume, the less the body is going to produce its own natural marijuana molecules. That's why some people are very successful, like people that practice meditation and yoga, and certain people Tai Chi, and people who are very into the mindset thing. They don't need any type of a substance. They get natural highs. I get a natural high out of my work. The pleasure of seeing my patients get better, solving a very difficult case somebody else could not have solved.
You create a high to being happy.
Yes, it's a high, but like again I said, it's not something short term. I'm always looking for the next challenge. I'm always looking for what's ahead.
So it's not a permanent state. You can't.
It can be a permanent state, but that's why I said you have pleasure is basically short term. And then well-being is basically what is long term. Happiness is what? Being able to combine pleasure and well-being holistically, right? For the long term.
What I find interesting is something you said, and I know we're all guilty of it. We all have our vices. And a lot of times we do it to be happy. You know, if it's marijuana, if it's sweet food, you know, people with sweet tooth and chocolate, it's going to make you really happy. If it's alcohol, whatever it is, that actually, you're saying, lessens your natural ability. Like if you become dependent on it. I want to be happy, so I have to go drink.
I'm not saying,
or I want to have a great time.
No, I'm not saying that you can't take a glass of alcohol. Or if you are a leisure smoker for marijuana, I'm not saying you can't, but the more you do it, the less the brain will become dependent, lazy, and not produce its own.
So you'll say, oh, I will get that later from somewhere else, so I don't have to make it for myself?
I don't have to make it for myself.
Because our brain loves shortcuts.
It loves shortcuts. It loves the easy way out. Many times it doesn't like the challenge.
Talking about easy way out, I realize something that's not up there is sex. Why is it?
Well,
it's not on the faking side, it's not on the neurotransmitter side. And I would think that that is certainly something that makes people happy.
It makes people happy. But
so why is it not?
Well, apologies, I forgot. Apologies, I forgot. Yes.
Well, it depends, right? Because you just spoke of the science of faking it as well, so it may not be happy for everyone.
I mean, this is a lot of information.
On that side, if you want it, it's just not there at
if
all.
you go and you type in neuroscience, you're going to see the neurobiology, the neurochemistry, the neurophysiology, neuroanatomy, neuro something. So basically, this is a lot of information.
All in one.
All in one, trying to condense in 15, 20 minutes.
I know.
So
and
apologies.
For non-scientists as well.
But yes, sex is very important.
If you did Family Feud and you take the number one answer, I'm sure the number one answer for happiness would be sex. And then
I would not disagree.
Probably food would be
I'd say it'd be between money and sex.
Well, it would be somewhere up there. But I wanted to ask this. When you talk about happiness, you're not talking about the color of happiness, because there can be something which is dark, which makes somebody happy, and there can be something positive which makes somebody happy. Is there a differentiation as to what makes somebody what happiness is? Does it have to be something positive?
Yes, basically these definitions are talking about something positive. I mean, there's a small segment of society, I presume, that negative things, maybe hurting people, hurting a dog, right, gives them pleasure. Hurting themselves, being masochistic, gives them pleasure. That is seen as something abnormal. That is the areas where
it's a deviation from a normal brain.
It's a deviation where the mental health experts have a lot of fun diagnosing and treating it if the person wants to see it as a problem.
I want to go back to interpretation because I think this is important. There's this study about what makes children especially more functional and successful, and it talks about grit and resilience. And I want to ask just how these things factor into our own happiness index. Is it, like something can happen to me and maybe I recover faster than if it happens to Kevin. And so I may be a happier person versus him. What causes that? When you talk about interpretation, let's say we had the same genetics, your brother, sister, well, we won't have the exact same, but still. What makes the difference?
Again, the combination. All our life experiences have a big role to play. If we've been molested as a child, believe me, we're going to drag it on to teenage life and adulthood. So whatever glitches we have when we're smaller, hopefully we don't have. And if we do have, don't keep silent. bring it out, talk it out, look for help. That's important. The happier we are, the less the possibility that we're going to have any type of negative or deviant type of behavior. So it is all about being a well-rounded individual. That's what happiness is going to boil down.
So the perspective is important, because you said there's the pleasure side, which is the feeding myself. And then there is the long term, which is others, kind
well-being.
of external focus. Right. So is this tying into what is becoming a lot more prevalent in science, in science research, which is the power of gratitude? Because, you know, more and more you're hearing that the more gratitude you have, the happier a person you can be.
Well, that's true. Because if you have gratitude, you are thankful for what you enjoy, your pleasure, and what you're doing for the well-being of others, the recognition of others, and living in harmony with others. Now, something I want to touch on. Kids, you said about kids having grit.
Grit, yeah.
So basically, remember, we have what we call neuroplasticity. The brain is very plastic. In other words, it can recover from injuries. On a daily basis, we are having microlesions that damage the brain.
Yeah.
We have high blood pressure, we don't take our pressure pill. We have sugar, we don't eat properly, or we don't take our medication for diabetes. We're an alcoholic, but we're lying to ourselves, and we take a drink and we say we're not an alcoholic, and so on and so on and so forth. So every day, if we're damaging the brain has a certain capability for regeneration. Years back, it was thought no. Kids have a magnificent possibility for brain regeneration, but it happens all through our lives until the day we die.
And is there some strategies to be happy?
But generally speaking, I try to mix it up, not only making it a neurological talk.
Is this the only slide? Is this the
well, basically,
that you brought on strategies? Because then you know that there is a glaring omission again in terms of strategies to be happy.
Well, I understand, but basically this is like the holistic view. I understand where you're coming from. I don't know if you want to put that, what you're talking about, but
what am I talking about now?
Sex. I mean, it is cognitive, physical, social, and spiritual. Yeah, sex will involve all these levels.
You can put it under exercise, I guess.
Under exercise.
Under exercise, yeah.
It's exercise, and it's also positive thinking.
No, but on a serious note, I think moving away from our 12-year-old selves, that he gets to say sex 15. On TV. But let's talk about, because these are, you know, I think of people who struggle sometimes in finding happiness. And while there can be components as to why, from your genetic to your circumstances to an actual mental illness, there are things that we can do on a daily basis to just give ourselves a bit of a boost, right? And these are the strategies that you're talking about here.
It can, but what we have to take into consideration too is that, and this is constructive criticism, from the time we're small and we're growing up, the type of education system, and when we have basically in our country too, is that we're not taught to be thinkers, we're taught to be followers. So the same education system we have puts us down. If you don't do it the way teacher so-and-so says, it's wrong. So you can't have a different perspective on things. So
Doc, you're taking me somewhere else. Now I'm going into like corporal punishment versus positive rewards, which we still struggle with having people understand the ramifications of corporal punishment.
I understand, but again, I come back and I say the system is in such a way for us to be followers, not for us to be leaders. We should be a society like a lot of the European countries. Let's think about Switzerland, visit. Let's think about Sweden. These are real first world countries. Let's not go too far. Let's go to Costa Rica. If you visit Costa Rica and get to know the people, they're very positive-minded people. We could be close in their footsteps, but we'd have to do what countries like them have done. And the education system has a lot to do with it. We'd have to do a revamping.
Or the Finnish school system is so progressive, and they're consistently
one
of the top
from their small, and let me just throw a perspective here. For example, a doctor in Switzerland, they don't have many specialists. They have a lot of general doctors and family physicians. So they have a nice fat salary for the month, but they have statistics. If the next month the public health system realizes that they're slipping, too many diabetics will have to be hospitalized, then that doctor is not doing his job. So basically there's a punishment, there's a certain part of that pay scale at the next month they won't get. So they keep their population healthy. It's not a band-aid fix. It is basically making the population from the base happy.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy from the beginning. That's a real first world type of concept. That's something we should have in
Revolutionary?
Belize. It's revolutionary.
So we skip past the strategies, but what you're saying is looking at things that will help to generate the type of happiness in you, from food, exercise, building connections.
It is, because remember something, again, an education system, not only a formal education system, but also what we're taught. We're taught to look for certain rewards. If you do this, you're going to get this. How many times as a parent, those of us who are parents, how many times we reward our kids for doing something differently? I mean, I have one of my kids, for example, I get called from school, Dr. Cervantes, you know, this is what your kid is doing. 25 plus 37, 62, does not write down the structure, how it has to be done, gives the answer. The answer is correct. Mental, there's a certain degree of you have to scold your child because this is incorrect. And it makes my child very unhappy because the level of intelligence is there just to put it. But no, it has to be this way.
Yeah.
They want the work. It has to be done this way. So then when my kid does that, fine, but does it another way because the brain interprets it differently and the answer comes out being the same. But no, it is not the method that is being taught in the school, so it's like it's wrong. And to me, that is wrong. I mean, I'm one of the parents who's going to go and talk with the teacher and say, hey, this is wrong. You're making my child unhappy by doing this.
Yeah. Wow. And you know, I gotta say, there are some schools in Belize that do include things like mindfulness as a part of their school program. In fact, we're seeing it more and more. So it seems that they're working on at least trying to integrate some other aspects into the school systems as well.
Well, I think teachers are the second parents. So, I mean, if teachers on a whole, I mean, we're going in the next direction.
Okay,
if they were happy,
let's go
if
back
they were
up.
happy, I mean, we get better results for our kids. You understand me?
That's why they say they should be paid better.
When you have the food point on the strategies, you're talking about healthy foods.
Yes.
And are there some foods that can make you more happy?
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of theories about that.
Chocolate. I've heard.
Chocolate, coffee.
Yeah.
Coffee makes Marlene happy, right?
It does.
It does. Some people go to certain businesses and they need to get a little rush with their sugar. You understand me? Yes, certain foods do, but those are many times those are like short-term fixes. That is just I pleasure me. Could we be consuming certain foods that make us happy in the long term? Of course. If you bring a nutritionist on the set, they're going to tell you. I mean, like a combination.
Brain food, omega-3s.
Of course. If you keep the brain healthy, there's a higher possibility we're going to be healthier. So what we do, feed the brain the raw products that it needs to manufacture whatever juices, I call it, the tamarind juice, the orange juice, the coconut water. So it can manufacture these and keep the electricity at 110.
How do you balance the stressful life that we all live, you know?
Well, I think
and still...
I think we look for stresses ourselves. I think we all like to take on more than we can handle. And I think the ego has a lot to play with it. You know, I can do this. Again, that is just pleasure. That is not happiness. So many times we're selling ourselves a false concept of happiness. So it is me, hedonia, right? Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Just me. I think about me. And then I look around and see what does society say. What does society say about Dr. Cervantes? Is he a likable person? Is he good enough? Does he know what he's doing? That is a wrong approach. It's basically you should do what makes you happy as long as you're not hamburging other people. A sense of general well-being with everybody else so that holistically you're contributing to society to make us a happier society.
But what really makes us happy is what doesn't make us bored. Do you follow that thinking?
Well, yes and no, because we're creating addictions. So for example, I mean, I just saw a kid who had one convulsion, 12 years of age, right? And when I said to the mom, well, we have to do these studies. You have to do a picture of the brain, electrical test of the brain. But for the meantime, your daughter can no longer use a cell phone. I don't want her on the laptop more than what they do at school, the school lab. That's it. For right now, we don't want to crazy the brain. And immediately the child starts eating her nails in my office. So I realized that there's a certain degree of addiction. And it's like the child said it, got brave and said, nothing wrong, said, doctor, so what am I going to do? Didn't use the word happy, but in other words, I am so unhappy. because I'm going to be bored, because nothing else works. You understand me, right?
That's a whole, I'll send you an article on that one. That's another interesting portion. But, you know, I'm trying to put this into context. There's a happiness index that they actually give to countries across the world. I can't remember what Belize's exact number was, but we weren't so bad. We were kind of mid-level. And we always find it interesting because if we look at the socioeconomics of the country, one would just assume that we would be very unhappy people. What are some of the things, if you were to say, has contributed to what Belizeans are well known for, or warm, welcoming, friendly disposition that most people generalize that they experience when they come to Belize?
I think our unique cultural mix. And I've seen people from South American countries, European countries, that when you're talking to other nationalities, it's, oh, they're snobs. But generally speaking, when they talk about us as Belizeans, it's, you're very warm people. Yeah. Because I think we like to listen. And if we listen, then we know most times what's appropriate to say, what's appropriate to ask. I think generally speaking, this unique cultural mix you can't find in any other part of the world is what makes us such a happy people.
And what about the impact of you're talking from the Eurocentric standpoint of pure races, but in Belize we have a lot of cultural groups and blocks. We have the Mayans. So if you come to Belize and they're about, what, 20% of our population?
I don't know.
Well, it depends on, are you looking identified? Because everyone's mixed with a little bit of something.
Yeah, but just in terms of identifying. So you go down south and you'll get access to warm, loving people, the Mayans. You come up to Dangriga and you come face with my people, the Garifuna. You know, you go to the Mennonite community, they're all warm little blocks. So that probably has a spillover for the entire national identity.
I think it does. I think it does because we're not a warring nation. We don't war for religion.
No.
We don't really war for politics.
We don't war for nothing.
We don't war for nothing.
Nothing.
We're kind of very complacent,
we are
you know?
passive.
Complacent,
passive,
passive. Yeah, we are. No. And it'd be interesting if our...
I want to put this in front of Doc before he leaves.
Okay.
You know,
so this is an ongoing conversation between Kevin and I, and you're going to be roped in now.
So since we're discussing happiness, it falls very squarely into this conversation. My opinion is that Belizeans are optimistically reckless. We will, for example,
we're optimistic.
We're optimistic. The average Belizean is recklessly optimistic. We'll, for example, buy an expired canned good because it's cheap, and we'll eat it, and we really don't expect that will have any negative effect on us. We will probably even vote for something that we know isn't going to help us, but we hope that it's going to work out. A hurricane is coming, you know, we don't prepare, and we just hope and we believe that even if it comes, we're still going to be okay.
Yeah. In true Kevin's lawyeristic fashion, he will give you many examples for you to agree. But what I think is a part, in my opinion, of what we are is what you said, complacent. We are.
So what are we, Doc? Please settle this discussion.
I think, generally speaking, a big percentage of our population is complacent. But I can also tell you something that, and I won't speak for myself, but I can tell you there are other Belizeans, it doesn't matter how young or old you are, we like to shine. So when we go outside, we burn the books.
Yeah.
I really wish that in all segments of society in Belize, we could also do it. Not only burn the books, but really do things in such a positive way. Because when you're out there and you miss home, you realize what this jewel is.
Yeah.
You know, how fortunate we are. A lot of us go out there and we work so hard and we come back with all these degrees and all this knowledge and whatever. But there's so many people here that don't even have a degree and they're so smart, they can do so many things. But the problem, we're complacent because we shoot each other down. We have this crab mentality.
And because we were saying before, we don't fight for better. And that's part of, I think, that's where our conversation comes from with optimism and complacency.
If I can just say something, because as a professional, for example, I can find myself working more with the foreign colleagues who live and work in Belize than my Belizean colleagues. My Belizean colleagues, a lot of jealousy. Keep him as far away as possible from our operation because he's detrimental to us. So it is this crab mentality. So what you have to do, you go out and you create your own brand.
But how do you classify Belizeans?
But we are going to
pessimistic or
we
optimistic?
are going to. He said complacent.
No, but
our conversation
of those
was.
two.
This is how desperate he is to get you to say his answer. This is so clear. So now you change it to optimistic and pessimistic. But I don't want to end the happy conversation on a negative note. That's all I'm trying to get us at as we round off. So just once again, Doc, I think in summary, what would you say to all our viewers about or potential to increasing our own happiness?
I think quite simply, there's an official way things are done. As long as you're not going to commit something illegal, just whatever's in your mind, don't stop and keep it locked up. Just go and do it. As long as you're not doing something illegal, go and do it. Spill it out. Don't keep the idea locked up. Go and spill it out and be happy.
All right. Thank you very much. And then we'll all go and sing a happy song right now. But we got to go ahead and take a break. We'll be back in a few for a wrap up. Stay tuned.